Here. So thank everybody for being here. My hope is that I use the next hour of your time wisely. My name is Tatum Tummins. I'm Senior Product Manager here at Kion. And today I am going to be joined actually by a special guest. So here in about 10, 15 minutes, I'm going to introduce Matt Cofran to you all. He's Director of Cloud Operations at Insulet. And I asked Matt to join us today because we're going to talk about FinOps Plus, which is something we talked about in the Q3 webinar, for those of you that may have been there. But it's this idea of a modern way to approach FinOps more effectively. And Matt and the Insulet group are a really good example of real world lessons and how that can play out in a practice. And so we wanted Matt to come and we're going to have just a discussion about what that looks like at Insulet. And then what we'll do after that, and I'll go ahead and flash the agenda up here, is after I talk about what is FinOps Plus with you all, and then Matt and I have a discussion about that. We have a really exciting demo planned for everyone today where we're actually going to talk about the power of AI for FinOps. And so I'm going to show for the first time ever Kion's in-app agentic experience and kind of demo some of the use cases that I think are really important. I know there's a lot of discussion out there right now about what AI is good for, maybe what it's not good for, what role it's going to have in FinOps long term. And so I'm going to spend 10, 15 minutes just demoing our version of it and answering any questions you all have. Um, at the end, I'll do a quick what's new and next with Kion as a product, and then we'll do some Q&A. And I encourage everyone, if there's any questions you have throughout the webinar for me, for Matt, or anything in between, feel free to put them in the chat throughout. We have a few moderators who are going to be monitoring and responding to a few, but anything we don't get to, I'll come back and try to respond to at the end. And so with that, let's first set the table on what is FinOps Plus. And to do that, I think we have to take a second and talk about what the FinOps industry in 2025 has looked like over the last year. And for those of you that are likely familiar with the FinOps Foundation, every year they do a State of the FinOps survey that comes out towards the beginning of the year where they ask practitioners like yourselves, what do you care about? What are your pain points? What do you expect to care more about over the next year? And in 2025, to not a lot of surprise at the time, there were three main priorities that folks came back reporting on. And it was they were still trying to optimize their spend and reduce waste. They were still working on allocating all of their cloud spend, and they wanted to get a little bit better still at accurate forecasting of spend. But what I found really interesting at the time is when you looked at the items that practitioners said they were going to be increasing in priority over the next 12 months, there were two new things that entered the top three. The first was FinOps governance and policy at scale, and the third was managing cost beyond public cloud. And when you think about those future priorities, there are three key developments that I think we can attribute to what's going on here. And the first is the introduction of scopes. So if you're not familiar with scopes, the FinOps Foundation earlier this year introduced scopes as a way to give some language around the areas of your technology investments that you could and should be applying FinOps practices to. So think of this as applying similar FinOps principles to your data center spend, data center spend, or your SaaS third-party tools, or maybe your licensing spend. Um, and then you have focus, which is the common billing spec that is practitioner-led, also driven some by the foundation, to try and get a common set of billing data across providers and tools. And what we've seen over this year is that there's an increase in adoption, both with practitioners like you all knowing what focus is, being interested in focus, but we're also seeing tool providers start to make the first steps towards adopting this spec as part of their billing exports. And the last development is not a surprise, I'm sure, to anyone on this call, but AI is everywhere. Whether that's in your personal lives, your professional lives, FinOps is no different. And that could be practicing FinOps for your AI spend, but it also can be how AI is going to impact how you go about your FinOps practice. And so when I look at the macro view of what's on the slide here of the priorities that folks are reporting to us and these developments that are happening, and then I take a step back and I think about the conversations I'm having with customers and prospects and what each of their challenges look like or what they hope their next steps are as a FinOps practice. It led to this concept of FinOps Plus, which we've refined a little bit over the last couple months, but FinOps Plus is essentially three focus areas or three pillars that I think are going to be really heavily influential for FinOps success over the next 12 to 18 months. And so I've broken it down into these three: automated governance, AI driven, and beyond public cloud. And here in a moment, we'll talk a little bit specifically about these three. But for just a second, I want to stay still high level of what FinOps Plus is trying to be. And what it ultimately is a more modern approach to FinOps. And I'm trying to do three things with it. Is I'm trying to give some language around how you can solve challenges a little bit more proactively. When you think about automated governance, one of the key drivers there is to try to proactively govern your waste or optimization opportunities and potentially prevent waste before it's even allowed to exist. When you think about driving efficiency, that could be efficiency driven through AI, which we'll talk about here shortly, but it also could just be less manual tasks for your organization to do because you have governance in place. And then lastly, enabling better decisions. And this is really where Beyond Public Cloud comes in. And we'll talk about how having visibility into all of your technology investments helps you get a better understanding of what an application or a product may actually be costing you, gives you better insight into, profit margins and things of that nature to enable better business decisions. And so ultimately, what FinOps Plus is trying to do is give some focus areas that help you all be successful with the challenges you have today, but also setting you up for success for what tomorrow's FinOps is going to look like. I also quickly want to touch on what it's not. And at a high level, I am certainly not trying to redefine FinOps. So all the FinOps education and material and everything that you already know about FinOps is still true. But these are three areas that I think are going to increase in priority. And I'm trying to create some language that you folks can kind of point to in terms of where should my priorities start shifting over the next year. It's also certainly not trying to add more work to your plate. In a perfect world, it actually is removing work from your plate because when you introduce automation and AI to your workflows, you actually reduce the amount of manual effort you need to be successful. And lastly, it's not just for certain maturity levels. There's definitely some things that I'll talk about today, or maybe Matt will bring up in his use cases that may seem, a little too far for where you are in your current journey, and that's okay. I'm confident, though, that there's something, whether it's within one of these specific pillars, that will be a use case that you identify with, and is something that you can take going forward as next steps. And so, lastly, just to illustrate what it is that I'm talking about when I say combining these focus areas with FinOps, if you think about the traditional FinOps that you're all doing every day, so that top right of reporting, budgeting and forecasting, anomaly management, and simply just trying to drive business value, it's about taking these three pillars and using them as a way to bridge that traditional FinOps with operational excellence and using those to make your practice sustainable as your cloud footprint scales as an organization. And so, what I'm going to do for these next three slides is just do a quick snapshot on what these three pillars are ultimately talking about, and then we'll bring Matt in to further discussion. So, up first is automated governance. And at a high level, the way I would urge you to think about automated governance is you start with this idea of policy. Every organization, this can look a little bit different. Some organizations, a policy might be how you define what an unattached EBS volume means in terms of waste, or maybe it's retention policies for how long you need to store backups for certain applications. Whatever it may be, it starts with this idea of creating policy. And then you apply automation to those policies that ultimately become guardrails. And to show you some examples that we see customers take advantage of, and Kion's soon going to be shipping with these out of the box for customers. Some simple ones might be how to auto tag your resources. So creating a tagging policy that says every resource needs to have this particular key, let's call it a cost center key, and maybe this particular application should have to have these values. It's creating that policy and then using a tool like Kion to actually go out and automate the tagging of those resources on your behalf. It also might look like a simple lights off policy for your dev and sandbox environments. So what we see customers do is identify which of their environments are for just testing and QA purposes, and they'll put in a lights off policy to shut that off on the nights and weekends automatically so that no human intervention is needed. And then lastly, another example would be deleting those orphan resources. And this might mean something different at every organization. One we use here at Kion, just to give you an easy example, is any EBS volume that's been unattached for more than 7 days. We take a snapshot of it and it's automatically deleted without any sort of human intervention. And just to call out the outcomes of what this looks like is by putting automated governance in place, you're preventing waste from being able to linger and exist within your environment. You're reducing manual work because now you don't have to have someone who's going and finding these opportunities, chasing them down, and then making a decision on if they can be deleted or what action can be taken. And the really important part, and this ties back to that operational excellence piece I just mentioned, but you create some scalable processes so that as your cloud footprint grows, your processes can grow alongside of it, which is really important for sustainable, repeatable success over time. The next pillar is AI driven, and we're going to do a lot of AI stuff in the demo today, so I'll be mostly brief here. But whether it's AI within the features that you're using in a tool, or it's the rise of MCPs, we're entering kind of a new world of what FinOps may look like and perhaps should look like. And for me, there are three areas that I'm particularly passionate about from what I'm seeing from customer use cases that I think AI is going to play a big role. And the first is guidance, the second is efficiency, and the third is governance. And I'm going to break that down in the demo here shortly. I would also plug that for those of you that were not on the Q3 webinar, we did a demo of what Kion's MCP looks like, and we used a lot of use cases around how an MCP connects to a broader ecosystem and all of the efficiency and automation you can get from that. So I encourage you to go review that if you missed it. But we'll come back to AI here in just a few moments. And the last pillar is beyond public cloud. So the image on the right is just illustrating a simple example of looking at your multi-cloud spend alongside your third-party tools. And so I use MongoDB and Databricks here as an example, but it's this idea of getting unified visibility across your investments. And once you have that visibility, you now can make governance decisions, optimization decisions, and you ultimately have a better viewpoint of the total cost of operating your technology, and that's going to lead to better business decisions. And so, with that, I know that was quick, but that's a brief overview of what FinOps Plus is, why I think these pillars are particularly important, and why these focus areas are going to be critical going forward. But instead of me telling you about why I think it's important, I want to invite Matt in for a moment here and have him talk to this. And so, Matt, if you want to start with a quick introduction, and then we'll get into a discussion.
So, hi, everyone. So my name is Matt Cofran. I'm the Director of Cloud Operations at the Insulet Corporation. You'll see on the right side, there's a diagram of really what Insulet is. What we do is we provide a patch pump that delivers insulin to those with diabetes. It's cloud connected, allows individuals to have insight into their data. And when you think about the users that we have on this journey, we take a lot of data into the cloud, which provides that diabetic information back to the users in some fashion. And as you can tell, well, as you can assume, that's a lot of money that you'd have to spend on pulling this data in, but it's extremely valuable for us, an organization, our users. So as we started kind of working through that, we prioritize FinOps as a huge practice for the organization to align with users, our business, and ensuring the reduction in lack of waste.
Awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back out of this PowerPoint so we can see each other and we can have a discussion here. Sorry, my screen got thrown off. Awesome. So Matt, you gave a little bit of a background on Insulet. Can you kind of talk about, what Insulet's journey through FinOps and CloudOps has looked like over the last couple of years? Any challenges, aha moments, anything like that that's occurred recently?
Yeah, over the past few years, I've been with Insulet for 5 years. Our journey has kind of been disconnected in a way where there really wasn't there was a lot of cohesion with the groups. We had a lot of scenarios where we prioritized costs, but not to a sentiment of making sure that we're using the money in the right areas. We've been in the cloud since organization was created 25 years ago. So we've definitely been evolving. And as part of those ahas, there was a lack of cohesion across multiple aspects of the application. So we have one product that brings the data into the cloud, consumes that data and parses it out, allows individuals to see that information. And looking at all the services and platforms we used, it was difficult to enforce budget. It was difficult to say, to the stakeholders, this is your cost that you're running. So the cohesion was really difficult. And that's where we started kind of having those struggles. And then putting everything together was extremely difficult, which made it cumbersome for our stakeholders to really ask these information so they'd avoid us. So the ahas was really just the lack of cohesion, transparency with the groups, and just overall collaboration that we'd expect.
So you mentioned the word transparency there, and so that kind of is going to lead me into one of the pillars I just talked about of FinOps Plus, and that's beyond public cloud. So can you talk to me about Insulet's kind of viewpoints on that, the things that you find critical and maybe how you guys are applying beyond public cloud to your practice today?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of our services reside in the cloud, but we have a few key that will not. So actually, Data, MongoDB, and Databricks are two platforms we use. When we started looking at existing tools that were on the market, we didn't have a single pane of glass. We weren't able to see external, internal, all these different data sources that we'd hope to be able to aggregate together. They were not connected. So as we started looking, we really said, how do we pull this all together to give an individual stakeholder visibility across their database, their compute, storage, and all these different elements? If they're not in the public cloud, how do we get that information? Which became a large struggle for us as we started working through it, and also for the individuals. It was hard for us to connect it together. It wasn't able to answer questions easily. So the external systems, I think, was extremely important to get that full level of visibility.
Yeah, and so can you, for your use case, can you maybe talk just a little bit too about how you guys are actually doing that today? Is there any other tools that you also want to bring in? Like, how are you tactically, if I'm someone who's listening to this right now, how could I get started? Is maybe the question.
So when we first started to try to see if we could do this on our own, we would go to all these different systems, take these exports, throw them into some system, and hopefully take and parse that information out. It was never accurate. You always had questions if it was correct, and it also was a full-time job. So as we started really working on a way to pull all these different systems in that could be, from different entities, different data sources around, varying costs, it was a very clunky process. And with the inability to get that single pane of glass, it was almost just wasn't worth it in the end.
Yeah. And then I think so. I know the answer for you guys because you're a customer, but can you talk a little bit about, I think one of the things that I want to empower folks on the call to do, and I know you guys have done it, is ask for focus data from your vendors and providers. Can you talk a little bit about that and the kind of what role the folks on the call can also play, just thinking long term?
Absolutely. So there was a lot of times we go to some of the vendors we work with, Mongo or Databricks, and ask for the ability for us to really aggregate this data together. And the responses we received was very unique in a sense of, we're working on it. It could be a year out, it could be longer. We have this, but it's not really great. You don't have this kind of visibility. It became really cumbersome and then also exhausting just to keep asking. So we would wait, but the longer you wait, the more waste you accrue. And it was almost like this to them wasn't really high value because to them they want the money, but they want to make sure that you're not able to eliminate waste in some ways is how it kind of felt. But I think important collaborations with these vendors was big. And I think the other side is, when you start working on this, you get the data, you're able to speak with a vendor and, or a service or a platform you're using and say, this is what we're spending. Can you help us optimize our costs? Give us this level of visibility. Now we have the data. So it gave us what we need to have that conversation that was very constructive. We've got great relationships with our partners. It just, I think sometimes it's hard when you don't have all the data and the ability to have those conversations.
Sure. And I think the last thing I would say here to all of you on the webinar today, whether you're a Kion customer or a customer of another tool, I think you should also hold your tool providers accountable to this. This is a part of FinOps going forward. And so whatever a Kion or whatever tool you might be using can do to help you get this spend into your single pane of glass, I think is absolutely an appropriate ask and something we're partnering with the likes of Insulet to make possible for our customers. So Matt, let's transition to the next pillar and talk about automated governance. So, what kind of governance does Insulet kind of rely on today? What do you hope that looks like over the next 12 to 18 months? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, we've got a few areas that we've been focusing on. So we have a lot of environments that we're using to support the different teams and different departments. Really, a lot of our goals is to enforce kind of the automation and the governance around, turning off environments when they're not used. So if it's a weekend, do we find that the CPU utilization is below 5%? Do you find that a load balancer hasn't been accessed in 7 days? And enforcing that, like really the automation is the proactive action to either turn it off or disable that specific component, which has helped us be a little more nimble in kind of working with these different groups. But then there's also the other side of the automation where, you can turn off a server. The problem is if you turn it off and somebody needs it, they're going to start, messaging a bunch of people and say, "Hey, where did this go? Why is it off?" So the other aspect of the automation that, part of that workflow is also to notify teams, put something in MS Teams and says, "Hey, the server hasn't been used for 7 days. We're going to turn it off." So they're aware of why it's off. They're aware of what action was taken and why that specific component was taken. And also looking at, enforcing governance across S3, for example, enforcing lifecycle policies for buckets, enforcing that level of visibility when somebody were to exceed a budget, an action can be taken that you've agreed upon. So it's not blowing away the AWS account. It's more taking an action that just deactivates or puts the environment to be dormant so that they can go in and help kind of collaborate and say, "Okay, here's where we messed up on our budgeting and forecasting." So there's a lot of that governance and enforcement that's helped.
Yeah, so you said something there too that I always want to highlight for folks is sometimes when we talk about automated governance, it sounds like this big scary thing that is not obtainable for some folks. But you touched on two key aspects, is that sometimes it's as simple as a notification, right? Maybe the automation is just if this happens, tell this group, right? Or make a ticket or whatever it may be. And sometimes maybe it's leaning into that full automation. And so I think your setup there kind of did a good job of touching on it, how it can be both. Um,
Yeah.
and so last pillar, AI. So can you talk to me a little bit about, how Insulet uses AI today, and more specifically, what kind of use cases are you excited about using it for going forward?
So from a FinOps standpoint, the AI journey has been unique in a sense of, we talk about different systems, kind of pulling all this data together, finding ways to aggregate it and kind of provide some forecasting or budget information. But a lot of our day-to-day is actually different stakeholders asking, how much is my storage over the past 2 months? How much is the CPU utilization for this server? Or what are the different metrics that they're trying to ask? Like, where am I at in my budget? A lot of those questions are just day to day, and they want to know because they're inquisitive and they want to be able to join this process. But then they feel bad for asking, or they'd say, "Oh, like I wanted to ask, but I'm sure you're busy." We're looking for a way for them to have that ability to enable them to do this on their own, allow them to take more ownership, take more time to ask questions in the system. Like, am I using all of my servers? What's the CPU utilization across these? What is this team doing? Where am I missing? Like, we want to enable them. And I think that's really where this goal for the AI driven was to give them the data and the understanding of why actions can be done by automation or on their own and say, "Hey, this would be a great example. Like, can we understand more about this and give them that data around it?"
Yeah, no, makes total sense. Um, So off that, I guess my last question here is, you've given a little bit of perspective here on how Insulet is thinking about kind of these three focus areas and some things going forward. Anything you would give as in terms of advice on folks on, how to get started in any of these particular areas? Anything that you feel like you guys have learned through your journey that you want to pass along?
Yeah, I would say that it can be daunting, I think, at times to work with these different teams. There's a lot of individuals that may push back and, they may not want to have the conversations. But if you're going at that conversation with data, talking about server utilization as an example, you're not coming in and saying you just got to shave this amount of money. You're going in it saying that here's the data around our actions, our suggestions. We can enable automation if that's possible for them. We can collaborate with them. We've had scenarios where, we worked on turning off environments. We didn't just turn it off on a Friday and walk away. Like we had that collaboration. We talked to them and showed them utilization. So a lot of the data and the journey helps, but I think the collaboration is huge and then gives them the confidence that this process, and you can use other teams as an example, but working with them to give them the confidence that you're not going to obstruct or destroy anything within their system and allow them to continue business as they normally would.
Yeah, I think that's a really good piece. Empowering autonomy while still putting in some governance is a big part of what I think FinOps practices are going to need going forward. Um,
Absolutely.
So Matt, thank you for that. And so what we'll do, so Matt's going to stick around if you have any Q&A at the end, but also for those of you that might have any questions for something Matt just shared that you want to pick his brain on, feel free to put that in the chat now. But what I'm going to do is I'm now going to transition over to a demo, and that demo is going to be all about AI. And let me get set up here. Great. Um, so a couple things. One, if you've never seen Kion before, I'm logged in as a normal user here. What I want to draw your attention to, one of the things I shared on the slides beforehand when I talked about AI is I talked about there being three areas that I think are critical for how AI is going to influence FinOps going forward. And they were guidance, efficiency, and governance. And I want to start with guidance and what I mean by that. And so I'm in Kion now, and you'll see up here in the top corner, we have Lux, which we're excited to introduce as our in-app AI assistant. And the first thing I want to draw your attention to is these prompts on the screen. And when you think about guidance, I think something that's really important here is that cloud technology, FinOps can be daunting, right? Especially if you're new to it or still immature in your journey. And I think one of the really key parts that is being maybe overlooked about what an experience in an MCP or an in-app experience like that this can be is that it helps people figure out where to go, what questions to ask, and it also gives them suggestions on maybe how to move forward. And prior to coming over to Kion, I was a practitioner myself, and I know one of the things that was really difficult is when you're working with your stakeholders, whether it be someone in finance, accounting, procurement, who's never used a tool, doesn't know FinOps just yet, and you're trying to help them be self-service on getting the information they need. I think one of the critical things is that AI is going to allow that guidance for those folks. And so, just to give a simple example, if I've logged in for the first time to a new tool, whether it be Kion or something else, and I don't know where to go, right? A simple prompt on the screen to say, hey, show me spend by service for my organization. And in Kion, this is all tailored to your permissions, right? So, what this is going to come back with is specifically the spend related to my organization. From here, I get some key highlights and some things that it might want to call out to give me some ideas of what might be important. I can do a couple things from here. I could click in and say, all right, well, my Amazon S3 spin looks interesting. Let me get down to the resource data pretty quickly. Or I could come back here and say, all right, I see something that's caught my eye. I want to now come in here and slice and dice this and do something further off of this. Or I might simply still be not sure, what it is that I'm looking for. And so one of the things that I really like about how the simple language model works for people is there's always that suggestion of what would you like it to do next. So in this case, it's like, actually, yeah, can you actually help me forecast my spend for 2026 based on this data? And so now, in just a couple prompts, I'm going to have kind of an understanding of my spend across my org, broken down with some highlights and some top services to pay attention to. And now, in one quick prompt, I also have a forecast for 2026 that might influence or may help me make a decision here in this moment in just a couple quick prompts. And so I won't get into all of these details here, but when I talk about guidance, it's not just that AI is making recommendations or making suggestions for things that you might want to pay attention to. I think there's a usability element that AI is going to bring to FinOps that makes it a little bit of a easier barrier to entry in terms of figuring out what you need, how to get it, and how to make decisions off that data. The next thing I would call attention to is efficiency. And this one's probably the simplest to explain because everyone on this call has probably used ChatGPT or something in that nature to ask it a question, be it personal or professional, right? And getting that answer quicker than maybe you would have a couple years ago. So I think we all conceptually understand that AI can be an efficiency tool. But I think one of the neat things that I call attention to is so let's say that now I've asked this for my forecast data for 2026. And let's say I'm a large organization with has hundreds of projects to make budgets for, And that's manually cumbersome to go into each project and figure out how to make a budget. So I'm going to ask Lux, can you take this forecast data and update my data science project, projects budget for 2026? And so now, using the same kind of guided path that I got to here, I'm going to ask it to do a task for me. And so what it's doing here, it's making sure it's finding all of the right things within Kion. So I have a project pre-made for today's demo. It's highlighting to me here what my budgets were in 24 and 25. And it notices that it doesn't have a 2026 budget, which is perfect. Here's also the important piece here, and I think this is really important. It kind of gets into the governance piece here shortly, but at least in Kion's application, we've made sure that this approve and deny exists for any sort of action that you may be asking Lux to take on your behalf. And why that's really important is because it allows you to lean in to AI while also still having these guardrails in place to make sure that whatever the action is that it's suggesting is something that you're ready to execute. And that's something I think is really important and should be a standard for all kind of AI influence features within FinOps tools. But the important piece here is that based on forecast data, it created me a 2026 budget, kind of breaks down what that looks like, and it's asking me if I want it to create that. So I'm going to hit approve, and hopefully this doesn't take too long. Great. So it gives me back a prompt letting me know it did it, kind of breaks it down. And just to show that this worked, I'm going to come in here to my projects. I'm going to click on my data science budget, and I'm going to change this to, oh, whoops, sorry. Go, nope, I didn't have the tab open that I thought I did. My apologies. All right, budgets. And you'll see here, calendar year 2026. And just to highlight, I'll go back to my chat history here. Um, sorry, chat history here. This is the budget amount it told me it was going to input, and that matches the number here. And so I know this was a one-off example of update this budget, but when you think about how quickly that could scale for your organization, just to put in placeholders, maybe it's things that you come back and adjust over time, but using AI to do tasks that would take you 30 minutes or an hour, or maybe even more on a given day, and use that time to do something else more valuable, right? I think there's a really important lesson there. Um, and so I'm going to come back here and actually, since I think we're doing okay on time, I'm going to do one more example here. So I know I just created a 2026 budget, but now I'm going to hit this prompt here that asks me to update my budgets that are currently burning or at risk. And so once again, this is a pre-canned prompt. And I think it's important to call out that these pre-canned prompts can be changed, right? So each organization may have different asks. That's totally feedback that we want to hear at Kion on kind of what prompts you think are the most useful for your organization, and they're editable. We can change them over time. And so what this is doing now is it's looking for any budgets that I have set up already, and it's doing a couple tool searches here. Um, It's taking a moment. What this should do, though, at the end of this, is identify, based on spend, if there are any current 2025 budgets that are at risk, um, and highlight maybe suggestions for what I want to do going forward. This is the beauty of a live demo. I guess I don't know for sure it's going to work, but I think Lux is going to come through. It's still working through. And if this doesn't work, I think I have an old chat history where I can show you that it worked previously. All right. Well, this is taking time. I think I needed to be a little bit more specific about project budgets, but um, this is the one I did before when I was testing. You'll see it's the same prompt that I started with earlier. update my budgets that are currently overburning or at risk. And after it goes through all its tool calls, it gave me an overview of kind of what I have running in this demo environment. And you'll see here, it highlighted that for 2025, my data science project was at risk, gave me a quick breakdown of year to date, how much I'm actually already over budget and what that average monthly spend would be. It also highlighted that my MongoDB project was trending to potentially be over budget. And then it gave me recommendations here on how I might want to move forward and asked how I'd like to navigate that. So that's what I hoped it was about to spit out for you live, but that's the beauty of the live demo. Um, so what I now want to do is transition with my last couple minutes of the demo to governance, which is that third piece of AI that I haven't demonstrated yet. And there's a lot here, but when I talk about governance is yes, governing your AI spend in terms of putting parameters around what services you can deploy or how much you want to spend is one side. But I actually think that there's a piece of AI that helps you govern the rest of your cloud. And so to show you an example of what this looks like is I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that Kion has a policy that we run in our environments around deleting unattached EBS volumes after a certain time. And so this demo environment doesn't have that set up. And so what I'm going to ask it to do is, can you create a policy to detect unattached EBS volumes more than 7 days? Snapshot. So I'm going to ask Lux to actually create a policy that will help me identify unattached EBS volumes of more than 7 days, take a snapshot, and then ultimately delete the volume. And so what's going to happen here is it's going to call some of Kion's endpoints. We specifically have one on creating policy and one that specializes, in this case, in cloud custodian. And so what Lux is doing here is it's actually taking what could be a little bit of a technical hurdle for some folks. Not everybody is familiar with how to write policy and how to read and write cloud custodian. And what's I think amazing about this is that I can now use AI as an assistant to give me that template of that policy that I now can go execute to prevent waste, be proactive, and kind of do that shift left proactive FinOps piece that we were talking about with automated governance. And so, in a way, I'm using AI to help me with that automated governance pillar. Um, and this one may take just a second. Oh, great. Perfect timing. Um, I think this is amazing. So, in about 30 seconds here, you can see that it gave me a description of what it did. It knows that this is an AWS only service, so it's marked for cloud provider AWS. It set its frequency by default to 1 day. I can change that if I would like. And as I scroll down here, if you're not familiar with Cloud Custodian, this is written in a Cloud Custodian format. And as I scroll through here, I can eyeball and see that it has the parameters I asked for. It's going to take a snapshot if these things are true. It's going to actually do the delete call, and it gives me a summary here of what it did. Just like earlier with the budgets, I have the ability to deny this or I could approve it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually say deny. And while it's thinking, can you change the frequency to be every 12 hours? So I didn't want it to run once a day. I wanted to run twice a day. And so what this should do is kick off another request to create a new policy based off that new frequency that I asked. And after it presents this one, I'm going to hit approve and I'm going to show you guys that it actually worked and is inside Kion for use. Um, all right. While that is working, I saw some questions pop up in the chat and let me make sure they're getting answered. Okay. So back to here, you'll see that it now has updated this frequency to every 12 hours. Same policy outside of that. So I'm going to hit approve. And what this should do, great. So it tells me it's been created, gives me the details, and I'm going to go over to the compliance check tab in Kion, and let me actually confirm the name that it gave it. EVS snapshot. And there it is. So now this policy exists in Kion, and I can decide which accounts or which parts of my org I want to apply this policy to. I can apply it to all accounts. From here, I can kind of make that decision on how I want to govern my cloud. But I think that's a really powerful way of how these things can complement each other. And so I wanted to show that today. There's a lot more I'd like to show and walk you through, but I hope that kind of gives you guys a snapshot of how, here at Kion, we think about where AI is going to have a really big role and influence in FinOps going forward. And so with that, I'm going to transition back to the deck for a moment, and then we'll do some Q&A. All right, sorry about that. Okay. So just to recap, um, Matt, I see you raised your hand. Did you mean to raise your hand? I'm going to assume no. So to recap, um, when you think about these pillars and why they're important, you start with automated governance. It enables that proactive FinOps piece, preventing waste before it exists. When you think about AI-driven FinOps, think about it as unlocking a new level of value, whether you're solving problems faster or smarter. When you think about beyond public cloud, think about the ability to be able to have that single pane of glass, have visibility into all of your technology investments, and ultimately make better decisions with that holistic visibility. And lastly, a FinOps Plus approach increases the value today that your organization can achieve, but really more importantly, is it's enabling operational success for the long term of where FinOps is headed over time. And so next steps for you, if you found something interesting today, you want to talk about it more, I encourage you all to figure out something that you can do when it comes to applying one of these pillars or all of these pillars, or for those of you that maybe you're already doing this, continue. And by continuing, I'd also ask that you provide some feedback. I know when we did a version of this webinar in Q3, I got some great suggestions from practitioners on some new use cases, some way to refine the approach a little bit. And so that feedback is always welcome. And then if there was something today that really caught your eye and you want to learn more about Kion, you can scan that QR code there and schedule a demo with us going forward. And so last slide before we get to Q&A, what's new and next with us? So coming in our next release, Kion 3.15, Lux. So what I just showed off for 10, 15 minutes, that's going to be in the next version of Kion. I'm really, really excited to get it in the hands of our customers. We're also going to release financial scopes. So think of scopes as a more granular way to group and allocate your spend across Kion's org chart. And then the last piece would be dashboard improvement. So made a lot of advancements in terms of how you can share dashboards, set organizational templates for your dashboards, and things of that nature. And then what's next? So after 315, we're in the works on kind of an overhaul of all of our automation policies. We're going to have new out-of-the-box policies for folks to take advantage of. We're going to have a new Kion policy engine. So I talked a little bit today about Cloud Custodian, but we're actually going to have our own proprietary engine that folks can use in addition to Cloud Custodian within the application. And then lastly, we're going to have some improvements to how we allow organizations to allocate shared costs specifically a little bit easier across their organization. And so that is it in terms of the presentation. So let me see what questions we have here. One moment. And then Ibrahim, if there's a question you want to read to me while I'm trying to figure out what I missed, that would maybe be easier.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that came was, what would you say are the beginning things to start doing as first steps to get to this state? And so if you could, yeah, I guess that was general question while you were showcasing Lux in the demo there.
Yeah, so well, let me answer that maybe because I don't know which pillar necessarily that was talking about, but I'll answer maybe across all three. Um, to get to to get to a state of starting, I think across automated governance, the first piece to start there is you have to have organizational policies. It's hard to put governance in place if you don't have policies written down defining what does waste mean to us, what are our compliance guidelines we need to adhere to. Those things come first, and then once you have that, it's either putting in that automation via something you build yourself or using a tool like a Kion to actually help you orchestrate those policies. That would be kind of how you get started there. On the beyond public cloud piece, this one is a little bit tricky because it depends on the vendors that you use or the types of technology you want to bring in. Um, like Matt touched on at the beginning, if you have a third party vendor that you heavily rely on, first thing to start with is asking them about prioritizing focus. If getting focus billing data is on their roadmap, because the more people who ask for it, the more pressure it creates to have everyone kind of buy in to the vision of kind of that standardized billing spec. Because what that allows you to do is then take that focus data that you get from any of your providers and have a place to consolidate and have that single pane of glass. The other thing that I would say as a next first step is just identifying what those key technology investments you have today that you don't have good visibility into. I know for a lot of folks that might be your own data centers, for example, and it is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to wake up tomorrow and have your data center cost in a file that you now can ingest for better visibility, but at least identifying where your areas of opportunity are and then making an action plan on how you can start to get your hands around that data and then bring it into, your tool of choice or your homegrown solution is kind of where I would say to start there. And then on the AI side, I think every organization has a different appetite right now in terms of how much Gen AI they're allowing their, engineers or their broader teams to use. But whatever AI services that you have approved, or if it's AI within your tool of choice, educating your teams on use cases. So similar to how I kind of walk through some simple use cases, I think whichever ones would probably make the most impact for your organization. I think there's some training and enablement on what AI is really good for and having folks focus on that. And then maybe even the inverse of what use cases is AI, maybe not the best use case for today, and really kind of giving some specific examples for your organization. So hope that helped a little bit there. Um, and then looks like there were some other questions um, above.
Tim, one other thing that came through was so I know you talked about AI for FinOps. What are your thoughts or any comments around FinOps for AI?
Yeah, that's so there's a lot there, but uh, when I talk about automated governance, you could just apply that as FinOps for AI. So, there's a lot to be said around visibility into AI spend and helping you understand, unit economics of that spend. And, most traditional tools in the market, whether that's native tools or tools like Kion, should be giving you some sort of visibility into helping you understand that spend. But where I think it's uniquely important is putting some of that governance around AI. And so, a couple of examples. It might be if your organization is brand new to exploring what Gen AI might look like for one of your applications, having some policy and automation put in place that says these are the AI services that we approve to even be deployed. And having a tool like Kion actually make sure that you don't deploy any infrastructure that isn't approved for AI testing is one way to start. Or maybe I think the classic example that I see a lot of success with is folks are getting started with AI and they don't really know what it's going to look like for them or what it's going to cost. And so they set up sandbox environments where they put budget thresholds on those environments. And so let's say developers get $500 a day to explore, innovate, but at that $500 mark, a tool like Kion actually comes in and stops the provisioning of any new services for that given day is a way to kind of govern those early stages of AI.
Awesome.
So I
Tim,
think,
another one came through around can you limit which projects or OUs the Lux AI will touch?
yeah, so I'd like to understand more there too. So just like everything in Kion, Lux is first off going to be permission driven in terms of what it can do in terms of um, a user can't do something with Lux they could not do with their own permission set in Kion. And the other piece is that Kion it will have a setting for Lux to make it something that you can disable if there are certain users and things of that nature that you don't want to use it. So I'd like to understand more on what you're hoping to restrict there, maybe to better answer that question, and happy to also take that offline if you want to talk about it more. Um, I see a question from Reggie about upgrading to 315. So yeah, when 315 is released, there's no fee or anything to upgrade to 315. It would just be like any normal upgrade. Lux is not going to be costing you more, doesn't change your license or anything of that nature. Okay. Um, all right. Any more questions that I'm missing here? I see some were already answered earlier in the chat. Um, Great. I really appreciate both Matt, you joining today, letting folks kind of hear a little bit of Insulet story, validate kind of what FinOps Plus is and why it's important. And then for all of you that attended today, appreciate you giving me some of your time. Hope you found something valuable and a takeaway. As always, if you have any questions, feedback for me, reach out via, it could be via email, it could be, there's my LinkedIn as well on the screen now. So happy to always chat about FinOps. So thanks all for being here today and have a great rest of your day.